where we connect the face of local business with our community and we help you get your message out. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your Friday to join with us. Today's business host is Jordan Ramis, and we're fortunate enough to have not one, but two attorneys from their firm with us today, Pete Hicks and Matthew Kahl. But before we get to our host, if we have any new guests with us today, I want to welcome you. It's always nice to see new faces. We will give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and your business to everyone later today, just before we break into small groups for more direct conversations. Just to remind everyone, after our host share today, our Executive Director, Liz Hartman, is going to keep us abreast of the latest happenings and all the opportunities within our community. After which our guests will introduce themselves, we'll break into smaller groups for some more direct discussions, and then we'll come back to share and do shout outs for the group before heading off into our weekend Friday. With all that said, let's welcome our host for today, Peter Hicks, who you may have been hearing me speak with, brings nearly 2 decades of experience in employment law and commercial litigation. He counsels clients on COVID-19 related guidance, regulatory interpretation, employment contracts, non-competition agreements, trade secret protection, and labor relations and negotiations. He is well versed in cases involving Family and Medical Leave Act, Oregon Family Leave Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, employment-related tort claims, and retaliation claims. At Jordan Ramis, Peter is one of the managing shareholders and chairman of the board of directors. And then we also have Matthew Kahl. Matthew, who I actually know from Leadership Lake Oswego, and it's wonderful to see him on the call today. Matthew is also an attorney at Jordan Ramis, providing guidance to clients in the financial services, commercial real estate, construction, charter school, and local government industries. He's committed to the growth and development of our community. He serves as the chair of the Lake Oswego Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee. He's a member of our Leadership Lake Oswego class, as I mentioned. And in addition to his practice, he's passionate about creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community, which has led him to serve as the vice chair of the Anti-Defamation League's Pacific Northwest Regional Advisory Board. He also serves as the ADL's local representative in the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crime and the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland's Jewish Community Relations Council. With all of that said, gentlemen, welcome. As we've said, it's wonderful to have you on the call today. Your timing couldn't be any better. So we're going to be quiet and let the two of you speak up.
Thank you.
Pete, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get the slide up.
So while Matthew's kind of walking through that, I think you guys are right. The timing for this probably couldn't be better given what happened yesterday. And for those of you that were asleep, otherwise doing something else, the CDC issued guidance yesterday that said for fully vaccinated people, they do not need to wear masks anymore. So this is obviously a huge piece. The impacts are going to be really difficult for businesses and employers because we essentially at this point don't know what that's going to look like. The Oregon governor, Kate Brown, followed suit almost immediately yesterday. I started yesterday with calls from clients, probably right around noon when the stuff came down about what do we do? And I kept saying, well, let's wait till Oregon reacts and sees what happens. I expected we would hear probably next week as to what was going to go on, but Kate Brown mid-afternoon yesterday came out and said that Oregon will essentially follow that and that masks will not be required in public anymore. This is followed on a couple of days or a couple of weeks where the Oregon Health Authority issued new guidance on masking, which they changed. They issued it first on around May 4th, or actually probably May 1st. And they indicated that for some symptoms or for some situations when people were outside, masking would not be required, but said it would be required for workplaces. They changed that a week later. So I did 2 articles in the space of a week about masking requirements. And they said that masking is now not required for outside work if you can maintain 6 feet of distance, but it is still required unless you are in a private indoor workspace in any other indoor office. So that's the state of Oregon's regulations right now as we're sitting here today. Kate Brown did say yesterday that she expects that employees or employers will be issued new guidance by OHA probably early next week about whether masks are now required in workplaces for fully vaccinated people. The scary thing, and I know I'm ignoring the slide here, at least initially because of the change yesterday. The scary thing, however, is that in her comments yesterday to the media, she said that The rules will be dependent upon whether employers can verify the status of their employees and whether they are vaccinated. So that puts the onus on employers to determine whether their employees are vaccinated, and puts this topic kind of front and center for everybody as to what you want to do and how you want to work on it. Whether you require vaccinations is a hugely loaded question. All kinds of privacy concerns and issues come up, and Matthew and I are going to run through a couple of those really quickly. So for the first question, can an employer require employees to be vaccinated? Yes, you absolutely can. So especially for private sector employers, that means non-union, you likely can set almost any restriction you want on your employees, provided it doesn't fall within typical discriminatory issues that we think about. So the policy shouldn't adversely impact people. There are several exceptions, however, so you need to consider things like reasonable accommodation. So for people with disabilities or an underlying condition that prevents them from being vaccinated, they may be exempted. You may also have religious exemptions as well that come into play. And then the other piece you always need to consider are privacy considerations. Right now, the EEOC has taken the position that asking people whether they're vaccinated is okay and is permissible, as long as you don't ask anything else. The key is that you can't require an employee to reveal specific things about their medical condition, but you can verify whether they're vaccinated or not. So that's one of the things you absolutely can do and you can require for your employees.
So the next question would be, what should an employer's vaccination policy look like? And this is something that we wouldn't be able to say every employer is going to have the same policy, because they're all going to be specific to that particular employer. So there's no one size fits all vaccination policy. You may have employers that want to have all their employees vaccinated. You may have employers that want to have the vaccinations optional for their employees, or you can have anywhere in between. And so some of the things that you're going to consider when determining your policy is going to be the nature of your workforce and the conditions of your workforce. Are they located inside? Are they outside? Are they in an office setting? And so those are some of the areas where, when you're coming up with your policy, you're going to want to think of. And like Pete said, you can require proof of the vaccination, but you want to be careful that you warn your employees that they shouldn't ask for any medical or genetic information that goes along with that proof of vaccination.
And when we're talking about kind of the nature of your workplace, what you really want to look at is, what's your ability to effectively socially distance? What are the number or the exposure to the public that employees have in a given day? And then what are the risk factors and underlying characteristics of your employees? So all those things should factor in. If you frankly have 4 employees, they work on a 2,000-acre ranch and they work in different sectors of the ranch, never see each other in a given day, you may not need to require vaccines. If they're working in a factory and they can't stay more than 6 feet apart, and you just can't do that, you may need to seriously consider whether you do vaccinate and whether you require. The next question is, if you don't require vaccinations, can you offer financial incentives to encourage employees to get vaccinated? Short answer is yes. Longer answer is very, very tricky because of issues related to discrimination and pay equity. So what do you do if you have employees that want to get vaccinated but can't because of an underlying medical condition? Do you need to give them the incentive? What do you do if there are certain numbers of employees that you have that are just absolutely vaccine resistant and will not do it, cannot do it? How do you handle it? What vaccine do they have to have? So there are some questions about the differing efficacy of some of the vaccines. So the J&J vaccine isn't as effective as the other 2 vaccines. So do they still get the incentive? Do you require employees to get boosters? So all these things need to come into play when you're looking at incentives. In my personal opinion, the incentives are really fraught with problems. So I think you need to be careful about how you do that because there can be all kinds of issues that pop up with it. And given, I think, where the governor is going now, there are different ways to incentivize people. And frankly, you can incentivize them by simply saying, hey, if you get a vaccine, you don't have to wear a mask inside anymore. That may be the biggest incentive that you got.
And the last slide that we've got here is kind of just in general, what are the other issues that should be considered when developing a vaccination policy? And some of these issues are going to be the various privacy issues that we have, wrongful termination, and wage and hour considerations. So if you're looking at the wrongful termination, this is connected to the emergency use authorization that the vaccinations were approved under. And that allows for individuals to require to be informed before they are administered the vaccine that they have the option to accept it or refuse the vaccine. So if an employer requires the vaccination of their employees and the employees are terminated or discharged for refusing to get the vaccine, there may be a potential liability for an employee to challenge that policy. It may be unlikely to be successful, but it's something that's out there. Wage and hour concerns. If an employer requires the vaccinations to be mandatory for its employees, does that employer pay its employees for the time spent getting the vaccine or for making the appointments to get the vaccine? Do they reimburse for travel costs? So there's a couple different components there. Here in Oregon, there's some BOLI guidance that states that if an employee is required to get a vaccine and receives the doses on site or off site when they would otherwise be working, then their employer must treat those hours as time work in the payroll. And then, the privacy concerns, like I said before, you want to be careful not to be sharing any of the personal medical information because that could expose some liability under HIPAA.
We've even seen situations where other employees are talking about the fact that they've been vaccinated, or you have managerial or supervisory employees talking about the fact that they've been vaccinated and asking subordinates if they have. If you're verifying vaccination status, it should be going strictly through a single point of contact. It should be going likely through your HR department. And that record, if you keep the record, should go in the private medical files that you are keeping separate from your other personal files because it's medical information. So it needs to be kept separate. The privacy issues, again, though, you can ask. And the starting point with all of this, unless you're subject to collective bargaining agreement or an employment contract, is that your employees are at will. You can set the standards that you feel like you need to in your workplace, provided those standards aren't discriminatory and that you don't have any underlying legal violations, but you can set the standards that you think you need for your workplace. So that's all we've got in the short kind of thumbnail sketch of what you need. I'm sure all it did was raise a ton of questions. If you guys have any other questions or anything else, we're happy to answer those either here or give me or Matthew a call or drop us an email, and we are happy to kind of help you walk through those pieces. If you don't have a vaccination policy in place and you don't have a clear masking policy in place, get one. You want to get one and you want to publish it. There are also a number of OSHA rules which were temporary that just became permanent that include employer requirements during COVID. Those were just made permanent on May 4th. And they were made permanent with the caveat that they would be repealed when they're considered to be no longer necessary. So they may get repealed next week. But right now, there are a number of obligations that employers now have with the OSHA requirements. So also make sure you're on top of those.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. What timely information. And thank you for knowing that, yes, I think all you really did was open a Pandora's box and give us all 100 other questions. I'll go ahead and ask, thank you for such a comprehensive overview of what we do as business owners with employees. But what about this slippery slope of the clients that walk in our door? They're supposed to have a mask unless they're fully vaccinated. Are we supposed to assume people who walk in without wearing a mask are vaccinated? Are we supposed to ask, hey, I see you're not wearing a mask, will you show me your vaccination card? What in the world do we do here?
So the OHA guidelines right now actually put a pretty significant burden on employers to ask and to discourage people, at least with the masking requirements, from coming in your store. I think that puts employers in a terrible position because it creates conflict and it immediately creates all kinds of issues. And it obviously early on, it's funny, I was reading some stuff today that was talking about how people are going to handle the vaccination pieces and requiring proof of vaccination. And On the masking requirements alone, there was a security guard that was shot and killed in an altercation. There was another security guard, I think in the Georgia area, that had his arm broken because he tried to deal with somebody with masking. Wait right now. I'm going to tell you to wait about a week. The governor and OHA typically come out Monday or Tuesday with their new guidance. And what we've been advising people is that your best bet is to do exactly what the state tells you. Most of the lawsuits you're going to get, and that I get the most concerned about, are not necessarily people claiming, well, you're barring me from your store. You're allowed to do that. Unless it's a public accommodation issue under the ADA, you're allowed to tell people they can't come in. If you don't have a shirt on, you don't get to come in the store. Okay, those kind of things typically work and they're enforceable. For the vaccination piece, what I get more concerned about is if you let people in, because the governor in her kind of off the cuff comment said that, again, people are going to be exempted from wearing masks, provided that the employer or the business verifies that that person or that patron has been vaccinated. It puts the onus on the business. If you don't check and you have a customer that gets COVID because of an exposure in your store, I think that opens the door potentially to a negligence lawsuit. So what we would suggest is that you comply at a minimum with the OHA guidance and follow that stuff as closely as you possibly can. Okay? And that should be your minimal standard and start from there. That should give you some degree of comfort, because remember, negligence lawsuits are all based upon whether you took reasonable precautions or acted reasonably. If you're following the government guidance, I think that's almost de facto reasonable. So that's the advice that we would give people right now. But wait about a week before you start putting stuff in place. Because like I said, I just wrote 2 articles in 3 days that I didn't need to write because the guidance changed so quickly. So give it about a week, somewhere in there, and then let's see how things kind of filter out. And you're going to be dealing with both federal regulations and state. So keep waiting at least a little bit.
Again, Peter, thank you so much for your perspective. I think we should clarify that you're not offering us legal advice. You're just giving a legal perspective. And we appreciate you going that distance to help make that clear to this crowd. We have enough people today that I can't have everybody on my screen at once, but does anybody else have questions for Matthew or Peter? Anastasia?
Yeah, I'm a quick draw. Okay, question. What do you think about employers who incentivize their employees to get vaccinated with dollar amounts? And if an employer wants to go that route, what are some of your suggestions on how to document that or approach that?
Yeah, Anastasia, that's a really good question. And at least initially, I thought that was kind of the way to go. I thought that was a good way to incentivize people and see what you could do. But it does open a can of worms. In that, again, what do you do with those people that can't get vaccinated? And what does the incentive mean? Do you have a pay equity issue when you're not paying people for that? In general, I don't think you do. I think it's more of a pay discrimination issue. So if I have a medical condition or I have a legitimate religious exemption that I can end up not being vaccinated, do you pay them for it? I think that's kind of your base level piece. The other part is if you pay them, it's likely taxable. So if I'm going to give somebody $100, I got to withhold taxes from it. I got to figure out what I'm going to do, and I'm going to have to deal with it as a bonus piece. So you have to add those pieces in as well. I think there may be more or easier ways to incentivize rather than offering monetary incentives. And I think what you're going to find is this is going to be I guess the hidden benefit, I think, of the regulation. People don't want to wear masks inside. It's brutal to think about. You got to be in one for 8 hours a day is really difficult. We're looking at what we're going to do to reopen. And that was a huge piece with that. You know, our lawyers can stay in private offices. And if you have a private office, the door closed, you don't have to wear a mask. But your support staff and everybody else who's walking around has to have a mask on. So I think the easier way to incentivize is simply to put a policy in place that says, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear the mask. If you are not, you're gonna have to wear the mask, because that's going to be consistent with guidance again. So I think that's probably the way it'll go.
Thank you, Peter. I saw Tanmaya's hand up.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much. So my question, I run a small art and design school here in Lake Oswego, and we have like basically K through adult as students coming in. And I guess for me, like, it's like a lot of these kids haven't been vaccinated, obviously, like, because they're kind of last in the chain of things. So I'm assuming for us that like our staff could potentially, if they've been vaccinated, not wear a mask, but we're still requiring, because the kids theoretically haven't been. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so, and remember what the definition of vaccinated is. So for Oregon, fully vaccinated means both shots and 2 weeks after.
Yeah.
Okay, so for kids especially, the 12-year-old authorization for kids 12 and under just came through. I was telling somebody the other day that the difficulty is there's this perception everybody could be vaccinated if they wanted to be. Well, to some extent, I had my second vaccine last week, so I'm still not fully vaccinated, and I should have been able to get one kind of at any time. So you got a large segment of the population that is not fully vaccinated. In the short term, I think keeping masking requirements in place, especially for the situation you're talking about, makes a lot of sense. What's going to be difficult to deal with is the fear factor that you have for people that also have high risk folks at home that don't want to come home, even if there's a very negligible chance that they're going to contract the virus or that they're going to actually shed virus if they do get it when they're vaccinated. If I had a high risk person at home, I'd still be pretty worried about coming home because I didn't wear a mask and possibly give it to them. So in the short term, especially the situation you're talking about, it's what we were talking about. Think about your workforce, think about the nature of your customers, and tailor your policy that way. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
How about the staggeredness? So, everyone gets their vaccines at different times, right? And
Yep.
then this idea of, well, how long is that vaccine actually going to work for? And to me, that's kind of freaky, because then there'll be like people who it will be wearing off, right? And maybe not so potent, and others who've just gotten one. And I understand the whole herd immunity aspect of it, but what are they like? Is there anything in place to kind of cap people at certain times or intervals? Because everybody's different too. I mean, we don't even know. It could take 6 months for one person and 4 for another, right? Like before.
Right. What we heard actually is that the CDC announcement yesterday was a surprise to most everybody. That, I don't know if y'all saw it, but the CDC director was on the news the night before and didn't say that they were going to be doing this. And there actually is some comments that surprised the White House. So I think this is the part that makes it really difficult. And as a private sector employer, you can go ahead and say, you know what, we're not comfortable as a business doing away with masks. I know that Kroger at this point has said they're going to keep their masking requirements in place. So I think that's kind of the way you deal with it. And if you are concerned, because there isn't a ton of hard, solid guidance as to how long this lasts, or if people are going to require boosters or what's going to happen, then you can keep the masking in place.
Well, and I'm also worried about those who maybe have underlying health conditions and have to keep wearing masks being ostracized because they can't take the vaccine. So that would be a concern of mine, that actually people would pick on them. And we've already had some of that where, somebody can't do it and people are like, well, why not? You're not helping everyone. And it's like, Jesus, like, we're all trying to do the best here. So
and that's a question I've gotten a lot, is what do I do when my employees are doing it? So your duty as an employer is to try to make sure that's not happening, but you can't control it significantly. As an employer, you better not be discriminating. You better not be doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if your employees are giving people a bad time, all you can do is tell them to stop. And you all should have something like an anti-bullying policy, or you should have something like that in your employee handbooks, which I know.
I'm not hearing it from employees. I actually hear it from like we have adult students, and there'll be this dynamic in the classroom where they'll be talking to each other. They're not directing it on employees as of yet. So yeah.
Yeah, and we typically say, kind of, when you do this policy and you lay this stuff out, make sure you're emphasizing to people that, look, this information is private and our own personal choices are our own personal choices, but this is what this looks like right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions for Peter or Matthew? I'm going to scan through 2 screens here. I don't see any hands up on screen number 1. Keep them up. Yes, Amy Valentine.
Thank you. I am so glad that I was here this morning. I was late, but I have a question. We have a restaurant, and obviously, and I also am living with my father who has health conditions and things like that. I am sure that we will continue our mask policy, and that would be for employees and customers. Would it be legal for us to, like, if you want to order a pizza and, order it from your car, pay for it, but, and bring it out if you choose not to wear a mask? But are we able to say that, no, you're not, even if you're vaccinated, it doesn't matter? I mean, because I'm thinking of health and, like you said about, customers getting COVID, even though, so anyway.
Right. So first in Oregon, you're going to have sector specific guidance. So OHA does special stuff for restaurants, like, that's a little different from the general standards. I suspect you're going to still see different standards for restaurants that may require continued masking in some situations. So I think that's out there. The other piece, though, is that, yeah, you can choose to do what you want to do with your store. The only issue you're going to run into with the restaurant or with any kind of place that's open to the public is whether there's a public accommodation problem. Think of it basically as you need to have a ramp for handicapped people to get in. Okay, that's what public accommodation really means. So far with COVID, masking requirements and maybe even vaccines are not something that are going to be considered subject to public accommodation requirements because it's an emergency type of a situation. And you always balance public accommodation with the needs of the individual versus the needs of the public. And if you have a public safety issue, that's likely going to outweigh the individual needs of or desires of a single patron. So think of it that way. But Amy, you can, general advice, yeah, you can put any kind of requirements you want. You can absolutely do that. Think about when you're looking at all this stuff, come back to, is it discriminatory? Does it look discriminatory? Am I treating somebody different because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of their gender, because of those type of things? Those are the real touchstones you're looking at.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very clarifying response. And thank you, Amy and Tanmaya, for your questions. Last chance for a question for either of these two. I'm looking for hands up on screen 1, hands up on screen 2. It looks like you guys have done a fantastic job. I can't believe nobody's got a question. I should ask you just another question just cause. How do you guys get your hair to look so good? In all sincerity, gentlemen, thank you so very much. That was comprehensive, that was helpful, and it couldn't be more timely. Excellent use of your prescience. So thank you. With that, Liz, it's time for you to give us all the news that's fit to print.
I'm going to give you a very short report. There is an equity forum tomorrow morning that's sponsored by the city and the school district chamber and a whole lot of other organizations. I'll put a sign up in the chat, but the biggest thing coming up is the Lake Oswego Chamber of Commerce Excellence Awards, which are community awards. They will be Saturday night, May 22nd, and we'll have that registration in the chat as well at lakeoswegochamber.com. It will be featuring our own president, Christopher Boyer, and Mayor Joe Buck. They will be live from a local business with cut-ins from award presentations from Iron Light. Should be an entertaining evening, especially since it's live, and those are the times to watch. That's it, Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, we'll be coming at you live from a back alley near you in Lake Oswego. With that, this is a chance. Do we have any new people on the call today? Any first or second timers to our chamber networking? I'm looking at screen number 1 and looking at screen number 2. We don't have any new guests. All right. Well,
I believe we have Carly on here, and there's one other person who might not have raised her hand.
Yeah, I'll say hi. This is the first Lake Oswego Chamber meeting that I've been to. Of course, I wanted to come in and see Pete and Matthew present because I also work at Jordan Ramis. I'm the marketing coordinator there, and I hope to join a few more of these moving forward.
Thank you so much, Carly. You're the one who sent me all the great verbiage on these two.
Carly's the one that keeps it all together for us, put it that way.
I try.
Big job.
Well, Carly, meet Liz. Liz is the one that keeps everything together for the chamber.
We're the ones that herd the cats.
It's a lot like that. Now, Liz, did you say we have one more person
I
possibly?
believe Jeannie McConnell.
Hi, Jeannie